In a worldwide study done of over 70,000 respondents, when guys who reported being unhappy in their relationships were asked what is the one thing they wanted more of from their partner that they're not getting, the number one answer was not sex. Does that surprise you? Now, media would have us believe that all guys care about is sex, sex, and more sex. But not only was sex not number one, it wasn't even number two. Sex was actually number 3 on the list. When these guys were surveyed who reported being unhappy in their relationships, the number one thing they wanted from their partners was communication. I know, ladies, that may surprise you. Number 2 was affection. Number 3 was sex. So when these guys were asked and they were given 9 things to choose from, the number one thing they said was, I want more communication from my partner. They felt like their partners were not attentively listening to them or communicating with them. And I know some of you ladies will say, now they know how I felt. Okay, I get it. But watch this. In this survey of over 70,000 people across multiple continents, the number one thing for women who are also unhappy in the relationship, who wanted more, you guessed it, communication. Guess what was number 2? Affection. So for all the differences that men and women have, men and women were in agreement when unhappy in a relationship. The things they wanted most from their partners, number 1 was communication, 2 was affection. For ladies, number 3 was financial stability, which is interesting in this world we live in right now of boss babes and I make my own bread and I don't need a man and all that kind of stuff. I get it, but most women actually want to depend on their partner for financial stability. You just don't trust a man, which is why you work as hard as you do, but that's a whole nother issue for a whole nother video. So communication was the number one thing that couples, so it's both men and women at this point, who said they were unhappy in a relationship, they wanted more of from their partner. So with that in mind, I want to give you a couple thoughts on communication, because I think a lot of people make the mistake around communication. I think we communicate fine, or they say we don't communicate well, but they don't know why they're not communicating well, because most people can talk fine. You have no problem getting your order right in the drive-thru. You have no problem communicating at work. So it's not that you can't communicate. It's that you don't know what you should be doing and should not be doing when it comes to communication. So let me just give you 2 quick thoughts on communication, since this was the number one thing that unhappy people said they wanted more of. Thought number 1 is you need to be intentional about when you communicate about what. Too many people just think that communication in a relationship is just going to happen organically. We're just going to do all the kinds of communication we need to do in the relationship, just kind of whenever it works and whenever we see each other. But the reality is we got people having the wrong conversations at the wrong time. We got 2 people coming into the same conversation with different expectations about what kind of conversation that's going to be. And so we end up missing each other all the time. If you just think about an average relationship, we got at minimum 3 types of conversations going on. We got logistical conversations sometimes, right? Like who's picking up the kids from school and who's got Susie at band practice and what's on the calendar this week and who's taking care of the bills. And, we got a bunch of logistical stuff that needs to happen in a relationship. That's one kind of conversation. Then we got problem solving, conflict resolving conversations, right? A relationship will have conflict because we have conflict of interest. So we will have to have a way to voice concerns, to hear each other, to understand each other, to work on the problem areas of the relationship. Those are problem solving, conflict resolving conversations. And then we have connecting conversations. And that's most of what you did in the dating process. Before couples had the extra stress and extra factors in a marriage, like paying bills together and raising children and all that kind of stuff, most of the conversations in dating are just connecting. We're getting to know each other, we're building a friendship, we're having fun, we're laughing, we're enjoying time together. So the problem is, if we are not intentional about when are we having connecting conversations, when are we having logistical conversations, when are we having our conflict resolving, problem solving conversations, what's going to happen is we're going to sit down at the same time with different conversations in mind, and we're going to miss each other. Imagine the 2 of you sit down to dinner. One of you is sitting down, you're exhausted, you're just looking forward to connecting after a long day of work. You're thinking, man, this is going to be great. We're just going to catch up on the day, see how they're doing. The other one is sitting down, they have an issue on their mind. And they want to bring up that issue because they want to resolve that issue because that issue is preventing them from wanting to connect. So the two of them sit down. How do you think that conversation is going to go? Not well is the answer. Yeah, you don't need to think about that. Not well is the answer because the one's going to bring up the issue. The other one's not going to be ready for it, not have the capacity for it, not have the energy for it. And so guess what they're not going to do? They're not going to step into it and hear them and want to deal with it. And the other one's probably going to leave that conversation feeling like what they brought up was dismissed, or the other person got defensive, or they minimized the issue, and the other one's going to get up going, well, that sucked. I just wanted to connect, and now not only did I not connect, I feel more disconnected, I feel attacked, I feel criticized, and those two people leave a conversation both feeling worse about it, and at the end of the day, their conclusion is, we can't communicate. No, you communicate fine. You just weren't intentional about what you were sitting down to communicate about at that time. And so for those of you who never think there's a bad time to bring up an issue, you're wrong. Just because it's on your mind and your heart, you don't need to get it off your chest. Sometimes we need assigned specific times. It's okay to come to your partner and say, hey, I've got an issue I want to talk about. When would be a good time? Or even tell them what it is. Hey, I want to talk about our fill in the blank. When would be a good time for you? Now, I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that other than those of you who like to ambush the other person so they can't come up with their thoughts and opinions in the moment and you can, quote, win the conversation. That would be the only reason to not allow your partner to know what and when you want to talk about something. So we've got to be intentional. When are you guys throughout the week having moments of conversation specifically for connection? When are you having moments of conversation where we're trying to address issues and we're going to bring up concerns and we're going to address those things? When you having the logistical conversations? If you assume that those are all just going to magically, organically happen throughout the week as you pass each other at different times during the day and night and they're going to be effective, you're wrong, and that's probably why you're struggling. That's thought number one, is you got to be intentional about when and what you're talking about. Thought number two is you just need to understand that you need to validate one another. Part of the reason we don't communicate well is we don't understand the importance of validation. If I bring an issue to you and your response to me first is anything other than validating what I've brought, we're not going to get anywhere. If you're defending, if you're explaining, if you're justifying, if you're dismissing, if you're minimizing, all I'm going to feel like is I brought something to you and you didn't validate whatever I brought to you. Anything else is irrelevant. I'm not going to hear you. I'm not going to hear your justification. I'm not going to hear your explanation because I don't first feel like I've been validated. So when you have a conversation and when the other person brings something to you, validate what they brought. It don't matter if you agree. I did a whole video on why validation is important. You can go check that out. I'll tag it at the end of this video. You don't have to agree with the person, but you can validate their feelings and their experience and what they're bringing to you. And when you do that, they'll be more likely to hear you back and your thoughts and your truth and your experiences. But if you lead with truth, experiences, it's going to feel like you are invalidating them and the conversation is not going to go any further. So when it comes to communication, the number one thing that unhappy partners wanted more of from each other is communication. So you need to be intentional about when you do it. You need to validate each other. And if you're struggling in either of those areas, you need to download our free guide to intimacy below. It'll give you some language to begin communicating about how we can get more connected emotionally, relationally, spiritually, physically, and we can create a game plan to feel more connected, which will help the communication as well. Hopefully this was helpful to you. If you've not already watched our video on 5 communication killers, you might want to check that out. I'll tag it at the end of this video, and I'll see you next time right back here on RelationShots.